This is my review of Death Note. Okay, so the police are starting to catch on to Light's dealings as Kira, and they're starting to determine what kind of killer he is and when his active hours are. So, the episode starts off with them determining when exactly Kira is killing people, and to put it shortly, with the exception of holidays and weekends, they determine that he's killing people between the hours of 4 and 8. So they determine pretty quickly that he's actually that he most likely is a student, since it matches up with the MO of what a student would normally work. They work most of the kids work most of the day, and then they have the rest of the evening off and have to do homework and whatever. So Alice uses that information to determine that it's most likely a student killing these people, and determines that if that is indeed the case, then it's most likely that Kira has a very childish sense of right and wrong, which he isn't wrong about, since Light is a senior in high school, and it does kind of fit into his character a little bit. He believes that what he's doing is right, and has a very perceived sense of right and wrong. But it also should be pointed out that the police has also noticed something as a side effect of Kira's killings, that because he's killing criminals are becoming more scared to act, and as a result, crime rates have started to drop just slightly. So they've noticed that crime rates have begun to drop, and that most likely, if Kira keeps killing people, they will continue to drop even further. So the police know that Kira is killing people in specific hours, specifically after school, and they've also determined that because he's killing people, crime rates are starting to drop. Light, however, is unconcerned with any of this, since he notably doesn't care. And it's later revealed why. So I explained how Light's father was a police officer, based on a little freeze framing you can clearly see for a brief period that the name Yagami appears on his father's template, his little desk thing. And in this episode, it's actually fully confirmed that yes, this is indeed Light's father. So Ryuk, finally putting two together, realizes that Light isn't worried, because Light knows that his father works for the police and will therefore have access to the police files on a home computer. So Light is able to follow the case very closely and figure out that yes, they have figured out that he is in fact a student, and that based on the times that he decides to kill. But in the process, he realizes that he may have enough time to actually determine the time of death, if he can also specify what the conditions in which the person dies. And then he gets an idea. So Light decides to kill people every hour on the hour for 48 hours, with the exception of when he actually has to write names in the notebook for an hour to set things up. Over the course of 48 hours, a person drops dead every hour like clockwork. They all have a heart attack. They all drop dead in a prison, and this is mostly to get people to notice that Kira can actually kill at any time. So that's the main message that's supposed to be taken away. I can kill anybody without being in the room, but I can also kill people anytime I want. So it doesn't necessarily have to be when I have free time. It's literally any time I specify is when the person will die. That's the message she sends to the police. And also during this investigation, they actually also determined that Kira is able to figure things out based on various news feeds and stuff like that. And because of that, several people actually wind up retiring as police officers, or at the very least from the investigation, knowing full well that they're going to be targeted if they're not careful. So now that they've determined that the MO has in fact changed, they realize that Kira most likely has access to police files, and they decide to actually start investigating the police officers. which is kind of Light's plan. He specifically set this situation up so that everybody else would track down L for him. He wanted the police to be on L's case, and basically he divides the entire police station up against itself. So by using the police files to change his entire MO, he's basically called out L and made him a target. So because he knows L will eventually have to investigate the police to figure out what is going on, and because L is a bit of a shady character due to the fact that he hides behind a computer screen the entire time, it makes perfect sense. The police are eventually going to come after L and attack him that way, and eventually pull L out of the shadows just because of human nature. So all Light has to do is wait, and eventually L will be brought out in front of him, and then he can kill him. So it's actually pretty smart. L's own investigation actually wound up doing him in, because Light basically baited him into coming out of the shadows and saying, "Hi, I'm here." So Light has basically drawn L out, and it's only a matter of time before L is forced to show himself in public. So yeah, that's basically it. And also because of the newsfeed things, where they start investigating what the newsfeeds are, some of the police officers realizes, wait, we're out here all the time. We could very well be next, because our names and faces are all over the news. So they've realized that eventually Kira could come after them, because he would most likely come after the people who would be investigating him. And they realize they don't need that kind of pressure, so they just kind of leave the investigation. They retire from the investigation and go do other things. So they quickly Police Chief Yagami is kind of down on his own. So he's down a couple of men because of Kira's actions. But in any case, yeah, that's where it ends. But then Ryuk notices that somebody is actually following Light, and after explaining to Light that he's neither on his side nor L's side, because he's kind of a chaotic neutral and he's only really there to observe the Death Note being used, he eventually explains that because he's roommates with Light until the Death Note is finished up, he explains that somebody is actually following Light, and Light quickly becomes paranoid and hides in his room, trying to figure out how he's supposed to deal with the guy who's following him if he can't actually know his name and face. At which point, Ryuk actually reveals a bit of a secret about the Shinigami. So, Ryuk reveals two things about the Shinigami that might actually help Light. First is that Shinigami actually gain any lifespans they cut short. For example, if somebody's supposed to die at 60 and they instead die at 40 because of Shinigami intervention, they will gain those 20 years onto their life, and so long as they have those 20 years added to their life, they can't die by any means. But he also explains that because Light isn't a Shinigami, this power is wasted on him. But then Ryuk reveals the second half of what he can do, which is that his eyes can actually see a person's lifespan as well as their name if he looks at their face. So he reveals that Shinigami is actually able to determine a person's face, determine a person's name and time of death and lifespan just by looking at their face. So, and while that isn't interesting on its own, he later explains that he can actually give Light that power if he trades half of his remaining lifespan. And it's a very tempting offer to Light, who is trying to use the Death Note to corner people. So, yeah, he quickly determines that the Shinigami eyes would be a boon to him, because at the cost of half of your lifespan, of course he would take it, because he quickly realizes that even if he doesn't live very long, he could at the very least use the Shinigami eyes to kill as many people as he can without actually having to know their name first. So he could very easily use the Shinigami eyes to basically cheat at, actually. He would basically be able to see any person's name and face without having to look it up. So he would just have to look at somebody once, know their full name, then he could write the name in the Death Note, and then they're dead. So yeah, it's a very tempting offer for Light, who is now going to be able to actually see a person's name just by looking at them. And it's going to be very interesting if that's the case. So it's heavily implied that Light does take the deal. it's heavily implied that Light is going to take the deal in the next episode, if not the one after. But it's heavily implied that Light takes that deal to gain the ability to see a person's name by looking at their face. So it's clear that that's going to add a very different dynamic to the show, because now Light is going to be able to see a person's name without having to ask them, and he can basically kill anybody he wants just by looking at them and writing down their name without them ever giving them his name. So it's very, very easy for him to actually kill people now. And also the police are going to be at each other's throats, because now L has to investigate the police in order to determine who Kira is. And that is going to be interesting, because now the police they already were pretty shaky with L to begin with, because again, L is just a guy on a screen who never shows his face to the public. And as I said, even in the few shots we get of him in these past couple of episodes, it's just a top down portion of his face and maybe his clothes. We never actually see him. We only ever hear his voice. We see the bottom of his face and what he's wearing. We never actually see his full face. So it's yeah. Again, L's a very shady character, and it's quite clear that the police don't trust him. But now they're gonna trust him even less, because he has to investigate them to figure out who Kira is, and that's going to be interesting, because up to this point they have a couple of clues as to who Kira is. But now that Kira has basically baited them into investigating him by investigating the police, it's only a matter of time before L is forced out of the shadows and is forced to confront Light in one form or another. So it's going to be very, very interesting going forward. But in any case, that's my review of Death Note. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook and on Twitter in the description below. And also check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It really helps me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way saying thanks. So be sure to check this out in the description below as well. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!